Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Welcome, everyone. I am super excited to have my friend Ryan Groene with us today. He is a fellow bootstrapper, and in the spirit of the last episode, Conditional Freedom, I wanted to bring on someone who also sacrificed pretty majorly to chase his dream. Again, like the episode Conditional Freedom, really all you need to be alive is food, water, and shelter. And quite literally everything above and beyond that is a comfort. And if you say, well, I want to go full-time in mobile home parks, but you're placing conditions on what it will take to achieve your freedom and to chase your dream. And Ryan is the perfect follow-up to this episode because the sacrifices that he made to get to where he is today make me feel uncomfortable. So I can pretty much count on one hand the number of folks who made a big sacrifice to go full-time in mobile home parks. And Ryan is one of them. So Ryan, I'm super excited to have you on. And if you don't mind, give us a little bit of color on your backstory and how you discovered corporate America was not for you.
Yeah. So first of all, appreciate you having me on the show. Longtime friends. We've been friends for a few years now. Honored to be on here finally, I guess, right? So we've been talking about it for a while, but you kind of hit all those points, and kind of like you and Ian, very similar story. Went to school for finance, got a finance degree. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, went to Miami University. Got out, worked, actually my first job out of college was a financial advisor. So, took all the tests, did all that stuff. That was not for me. Quit that 6 months in. Got another corporate finance job, an actual corporate finance job with a large Fortune 500 insurance company. Worked there for 5 years, essentially. And then I did, I always looked at doing like some side hustle or getting into real estate right. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad in college. How do I get out of this thing that they call the rat race? And until you actually experience the rat race, sitting in a cubicle for 9-10 hours a day, man, I'll tell you what, there's nothing that takes your soul quicker than that. I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate. But with COVID, everybody's working from home. So, you know what, you don't have that same, I guess, corporate drudgery that you would on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure you still feel it, but you know, so I'd go in, I'd have to be there at whatever, 8 o'clock, couldn't have facial hair, had to wear a suit, like really, you know, dry and basic 9 to 5, right? Got into that. And then I realized that this life was not for me. So how do I exit quicker, right? And I was making a good salary, you know, coming out of college. You know, I was making north of 60, 70 grand at my highest point. And being, you know, in your 20s, that's pretty good money for not having any kids, right? And living in a Midwest city where, you know, there's 2 million people and not a lot of expense. So that's kind of like my background as far as like working in the financial world and the corporate world. It wasn't like anything crazy. It was pretty, you know, I went to school, got a finance degree, and then found out that I fell in love with mobile home parks kind of on the side. And how do I make that happen? And how did I make that happen? And I'm happy to talk about that transition. That's just my background, you know, kind of in a nutshell over the last 5 to 10 years.
So I too worked a banking job and several other corporate jobs. And what I found from working in the car industry to banking to a couple other things is that like the Bon Jovi song, it's all the same, only the names will change. And so whether you're in insurance or selling cars or working for a big bank, it's pretty much so a game of politics and it's soul crushing.
Yeah.
It's soul crushing.
Yeah, it is. So basically what led me to a quicker path was basically I was not shown the door, but I knew that I was going to exit that door relatively quickly. So meaning, like you just said, whether it's political or you don't have the correct manager or whatever you want to call it, right? It doesn't matter. The corporate game is something that, you know, a lot of people play, and there's a lot of people that are successful in it. And it allows you to have discretionary income to invest in mobile home parks, right? There's nothing wrong with that corporate life. As long as you're open to other avenues and there's other things out there, that's what I always preach to people. There's nothing wrong for working for somebody else, right? If that's what you want to do and you're okay with that, while also doing some side investments and taking a slower progress, that's fine. Just be open to the fact that there's other ways to do it, other ways to get what you want, and a lot quicker period. For me, the period was, I went full time by the time I was 27, 28. So I had looked at doing mobile home parks basically by the time I was 24, 25, looked at buying a bunch of stuff, kind of stumbled upon mobile home parks. And then I was basically, I had moved from Cincinnati to Cleveland and found a job. And then I met a couple guys along the way. And what allowed me to leave and kind of take that sacrifice was Buckeye Communities. I started working for them as their operations director. They did not pay me a full-time salary. I went from making, almost six figures to basically cutting that in more than half, right? And I was basically living on that. So the past 3 years of being full-time, I did whatever it took to kind of make my own ends meet, right? I was walking dogs at one point. I think I had told you that. I was like, anything that I had or I had excess, I would maybe sell if I didn't feel I needed it anymore. I cut my life pretty to simplistic terms and pretty essential, right? What are my essential goods? I have my rent to pay, I have food, and I have some bills, right? And what is that number? And the number is relatively low if you have no kids and your life's pretty simple, but it's more achievable than what everybody thinks, because once you cut out all the excess, you realize that you're left with, you can get to your dreams a lot quicker. And now, 2 years, I'm worth a lot more, but I'm still paying myself, kind of like what you and Ian are, is not a super lavish lifestyle. So I'm happy to dive into the sacrifices more or that type of stuff. But I mean, that's kind of my progression in a quick 5-minute high level.
So like any interview I ever do, I have questions prepared and we always make a pivot. And so I'm going to hit you with something I don't think you've been asked before. And I didn't plan this. So that makes it fun.
Yeah.
Ryan, you're talking like this is no big deal. And I want to actually spend less time on the details and more time on the emotions. Because so Ian and I've we're probably at about almost 300 people that we have either formally or informally been mentors to. And I've got to say, it all comes down to one word, and that's emotion. And the amount of logic people throw either way to make a big sacrifice and go full time and bootstrap it like you, or to maybe possibly never get into the space at all because they have, I got to make $100,000 a year to go full time, right? Wherever you land on that spectrum, what just screamed off the page about your answer right there is it was very matter of fact. So my question to you is, you looked at this so black and white, or is it just been so long that you're like, that's just kind of what happened and I'm glad I did it? Because for those who are where you were a few years ago, I know that you felt those same fear, doubt, those limiting emotions that create limiting beliefs in your mind. What were those for you? How did you overcome those? How did you discover what sacrifices you need to make? And then how did you psych yourself up to bust through those emotions?
To your point, I actually just had this conversation with my girlfriend Allison last night. She's like, you realize like you just talk about it like it's nothing, and to like most people it seems like a ton. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it's just your day to day now. So I don't really think of it like that. I mean, I do from time to time, right, where I'm resetting goals and resetting my life and stuff like that. But yeah, day to day, I don't think about it like it was no big deal. And it's a very emotional and lonely roller coaster. I mean, it's not, the emotional mindset is, I had no other option, so I really couldn't fail, right? So I put all of my chips and all my money into a deal, and I had to make it work. So I went all in on myself and mobile home parks, and I didn't really have an option. So when you don't have an option, or you're hungry, or you don't have money, and you're a lot hungrier and the drive is a lot more. So my drive outweighed all of my kind of like fear and emotions and all the logic that I kind of just threw out the window, right? Because the logical person would be like, why would you give up this to go be a trailer park owner? And to be honest, yeah, some days I have those doubts and fears, and because it's lonely, right? I don't have an office. My dog's sleeping back here, and that's my coworker, right? So Yeah, I mean, it's a very, at first it was very, it was hard to do. I mean, it wasn't easy. And now that I've looked back, I'm like, wow, it was a little bit easier than what I necessarily had led on. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's not easy. And it's not an easy roller coaster or it's not an easy ride to basically, go full time in mobile home parks. It is tough. I mean, there's days where you're going to want to quit. There's days you're going to want to give up. But for me, I remember still avidly sitting in my cubicle and thinking, how the heck can I get out of here? I just remember the emotion that I felt personally at my desk, like literally wanting to bang my head against my keyboard and just like, what am I doing here? And I was like, I cannot sit here for 40 more years. I don't care if I'm getting raises, getting promoted, whatever. I cannot sit here. So I found an out, and this was my out. So I really had no other option. And you have to make investing emotional. And then you also have to think about what you want in the future, because that kind of, if you see it, I'm not trying to get all woo-wooey on everything, but I already knew what I was going to be doing. I was telling people I was a mobile home park investor while I had a corporate job. So I was already kind of throwing that out there, and I knew what I was going to do. That helps a lot too. If you believe that you're already doing it, and it's a little woo-wooey for a lot of people, but I mean, it does help. And, I talk like it's no big deal, and you do the same, right? I mean, we all do it on the day-to-day basis, but there's a bigger jump for us too, right? That's scary, right? How do I go buy, how do I go buy like my biggest objective right now is how do I go buy a 300 unit park? And that's scary to me, even though I already own all that, right? I just have it in different pieces. So you're always going to be scared of something, but getting over that and just having the confidence in yourself to move forward is what's important.
David Tepper, billionaire owner of the Carolina Panthers, one of my favorite things that he says over and over and over again is calculated risks. Mm-hmm. Ryan, you described something that I also experienced, which was I'm sitting in corporate America, and the pain of a job that was not fulfilling was greater by order of magnitude than the fear of quitting that and cutting off that income.
Correct.
That created a burn the ships, to use a cliche type scenario where you feel like you have no other option. I think for folks listening in, that is exactly what I wanted people to walk away with from this episode, amongst hopefully being inspired listening to your story too, is how do you mentally come to the point where you no longer put conditions on your freedom? And in a couple of words, or to borrow a cliche, you have to burn the ships. You have to have no other option. And then all of a sudden, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. And I have one word: preparation. Literally, I would be on my lunch break. I would be at night. I'd be on the weekends. I read every book. I listened to every podcast. I talked to every single person. I built my own database. I was entrenched in it. So that's another thing. It's not just, all right, quit my job and go buy a mobile home park. It's more like you have to be prepared for the opportunity before it actually comes. And that is probably the biggest takeaway that I would say. If you're going to do something, you have to be prepared for it anyways. So, if you go quit your job tomorrow and you literally know nothing, you don't even know how to spell trailer park, you're going to fail. I don't care what anyone says unless you've got $1 million in the bank. It's like me. I had about 40,000 in my 401k and threw it into a deal, and now it's paid off handsomely. But it was a calculated risk, like you said, and I was more prepared than what I had thought for. It's just like all of our, whether you're a sports fan or not, those guys prepare for basically 60 minutes or an hour or two of playtime, and they spend a ton of time preparing. I played baseball in college, and the same thing. We had more practices, more everything all year round for 2 hours of being on the field. That's same with mobile home park investing and everything else, right? You need to spend a ton of time prepping for it in order to make the risk a lot more safe, right? Because if you're just throwing it all to the wind, it's going to hit you in the face, and you're definitely going to fail. If you're not prepared at least somewhat.
I love it. And you're spot on. There's a wonderful book that a former mentee of mine and I really like called The One Thing. And I definitely recommend the read. The gist of it is, whatever, to borrow from The Alchemist, the book The Alchemist, whatever your personal legend is, whatever that goal that your life is supposed to be all about, that should be the one thing that you spend an hour to 4 hours a day chasing. And what you said rang true with me because I did the exact same thing you did, which was, yeah, I'm here at this job, but I am in my spare time, all of my spare time. I'm chasing my personal legend. Like, this job that I have right now is putting food on the table until I can get full time. Because like you, it took me 2 years almost on the anniversary to get full time. And that was spent proving, number one, I could actually make money in this space. So we bought 3 mobile home parks, well, 2, and we were about to close on a third before I even went full time. So I proved I could make money. And then number 2, I spent almost an entire year planning to go full time. So this wasn't like, oh, I heard about mobile home parks. Great, let me quit my job. And if I recall correctly, you said it took you 3 years.
So 3 years from the fact that I discovered mobile home parks.
Yep.
So I discovered the asset class, and I did go to a boot camp, and it took me 3 years to purchase one. That is correct. And between that, I'd switched jobs twice, and then I had also lost the job as well. So I was more, unlike you, I had no backup when I lost my job in Cleveland. I didn't own a park yet. I was under contract for one, but I did not own one yet. So I was prepping. I had already liquidated my 401k. I was prepping for it. But in the meantime, we hadn't closed. And even when we did close, I still have not, to this day, really paid myself from my parks, which is, it's kind of crazy and stupid at the same time. I've sold a couple, so I've obviously had some liquidity events, but I've also had some income from operationals, from operating parks for some people. And yeah, I mean, it's a weird journey, and you have to find your own place and what works for you within certain calculated risk. It's kind of the Sam Zell way, right? How I look at things. And I'm from finance school, so I look at things from a risk reward analysis. I'm very analyzed by nature, and things are kind of black and white with a little bit of gray in my life for the most part. So that's how I try to live my life and relay my message a little bit, that it's easier to do it than you think. You just have to put it down on paper, and what's that path forward for you in your situation.
So those listening in, now you know why I say that Ryan makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because he didn't even have his first one when he went full time. And I had bought almost 3. Our money was non-refundable. I mean, it was pretty much done when I quit and went full time for our third. So there's always someone who's a little bit hungrier and is willing to sacrifice a little bit more. And for me, that's Ryan. That's a big reason why we're friends, and I respect the heck out of him, because he was willing to make that sacrifice. So Ryan, I'm going to butter you up with some compliments there, and then I'm going to ask you the hardest question I have.
Okay, I'm ready.
Which is, I know for a fact people are listening in right now, and they're going, yeah, you were in your 20s. You could fail because you were young, you didn't have kids, you didn't have a wife. What do you say to those folks?
I would say you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's no doubt about it, right? I could take a little bit more risk. I mean, that's how life works. But to the same degree, if you're 40 years old, you might be making, 100 plus figures, and you might have 300, 400, 500,000 in equity in your house or in cash laying around, right? I don't know. So I would say that those are nothing but excuses for basically you're telling yourself on the way to not buying a park or not going full time. And going full time does not, like, it's not just a straight line. I mean, it's a step-by-step basis. I mean, you just heard Ryan, they bought 3 parks before they went full-time. Mine was more like forced by nature. I was forced to do it, basically. So I would say those are nothing but excuses. And, somebody that's older might have somebody that doesn't have it on the young perspective. So somebody with money, right? Maybe they can come find a guy like me who's ready to trade the sweat equity, right? That's, and you have the money, I have the sweat equity and the knowledge, and I can go do it. You can still work your career and then fund more mobile home parks, because there's always an avenue to get where you want to go. You just have to figure out your path and what assets do you have to add to that, right? Like mine was time and not a lot of expenses. So I could take a little bit more risk. Somebody that's older or has a family, maybe they have a lot more disposable income, and they have a lot more business knowledge, right? Because they've been at it for 20 years, and they can add to that. There's always a piece to the puzzle, whether it's time, money, or the deal itself, right? The 3 keys to most deals.
My wife and I had a conversation over the last weekend about what would happen if we lost it all and we had to start over again. And without thinking twice, we both agreed we'd be totally happy moving into another mobile home and starting from scratch and bootstrapping it again with a 20-month-old. And Andrew Keel had a very similar story. He's moved his family, he's got 2 kids now, into a mobile home park. So I have a son and a mortgage, and I would still do it today if I lost it all. So I could not agree more with you, Ryan. It is ultimately an excuse. And I have had this conversation many a time with people who get very frustrated with me when I say that. And generally how that conversation goes is you can tell they are really frustrated, and then you can tell they go, you know what, it is an excuse. And again, in the spirit of mobile home parks in real life, people do not listen to this podcast to get the warm and fuzzy and then create a delusion and use it as an escape because they hate their boss. People listen to this podcast because they want to know the truth. And the truth is, it's an excuse. Because I would do it. Ryan, you're not married or with kids yet, but I guarantee you, your girlfriend and future kids would be proud of you for making a sacrifice like that. And I bet you would do it again without thinking twice. And my wife, who came on the podcast years ago and basically said, like, you thrust me into this, which was totally not cool, but I'm glad you did, is now at the point where she's like, yeah, we can move into one of these if we had to. I don't want to. But if this is what you truly, if this is your personal legend, so to speak, if this is what you're truly after, you're either going to find a way or you're going to find an excuse. So I want to throw another one at you that's more in the same vein, but is a little bit, it's a fresher one that I hadn't had this thrown at me as frequently as, well, I got a mortgage and kids. What about the people who have a ton of folks that report to them? I've worked my way up to the C-suite, or I've worked my way up to a lucrative middle management position where I have 200 people reporting to me, and I don't utterly hate my job, but I see the writing on the wall because I interview people in their 60s all the time who are never going to make what they made in their 40s. In other words, like, I see that I need to get out, but at the same time, like, I worked really hard to get here. What would you say? You mentioned earlier other ways in than going full time. What would you say to someone like that who legitimately goes, look, it's not that I'm not willing to move into a mobile home park and make a big risk on myself. It's just that I know for a fact that if I quit this job today, I couldn't just find it tomorrow because I wasn't in my 20s. I wasn't at an entry level or 1 or 2 rungs above an entry level position. I was at a seriously high position. What would you say to someone like that who looks at you and goes, well, you're in your 20s, you didn't have any money, you're not risking much? What would you say to that?
I would say, like I was hinting on earlier, they have something that you and I don't have. You don't just get to a C-level exec type position in corporate America by being a dummy with persons and or businesses, right? I mean, you're a proven person, unless your dad or mom or family owns the company. I mean, aside from that, if you worked your way up, I mean, you know a little bit about business, right? And you probably acquired some nice, maybe stock options or cash along the way, right? So you might have that W-2 or that balance sheet that then go sponsor a loan, right, of $2 million, or you might have some excess funds. So the way for that person, let's say that person's in their 40s or 50s, they might be making like $150,000 to $300,000 a year with whatever bonus, and they got kids and a mortgage and they've been working for 20 something years. I would say they have a lot more disposable income, and they probably are spending a lot more than what they probably need to. And then their ways in is providing as a loan sponsor or providing some capital to an active person that they may want to partner on to run the day-to-day operations. Or if they don't want to be as active, there's plenty of operators out there that offer a passive investment for people, right? So that could be, while that's not actively investing in mobile home parks, if you have enough income to invest, you could see your way out by getting a preferred return or something like that. I'm not trying to go down that path because that's not really the point of this conversation. But as far as an active standpoint, if you got a lot more money and maybe some business skills, you could find somebody in their 20s that's like, hey, I got no money, but I got some deals and I'm hungry. I want to go live in these things. Kind of like you and I did. I didn't go live in it like you and Ian did, but you guys found an older guy that had been in the business and funded the deal, right? So same with a guy that's working somewhere else and is making a few $100,000, you can supply the equity, which is the capital, and then the younger guy can supply the potentially the deal and the time operating the thing. So there's ways to that, and then all you do is you do that a couple times, and then you maybe rinse and wash your capital out through a sale or a liquidity event. Before you know it, you might have 100 grand coming in, and maybe you can live off of that. Maybe you can do a consulting gig, and you can take your full time and slowly progress to part time to no time, right? So there's ways to it. Maybe it's a slower burn versus a quick burn, but there's still paths forward. They just don't want to see the path forward a lot of times.
Two of my former mentees come to mind, and that's where that question came from, and both of which have put mobile home parks under contract and have a path to being full-time. And I am so proud of both of them. I know they're both listening. And I've got to say, Ryan, you answered it exactly how I would. You've got to find your way in. It's not going to be comfortable, and it's also not going to be quick. Even if you have nothing, if you want to validate that excuse of, well, you're in your 20s, you didn't have kids, you didn't have a mortgage, whatever, right? Even if you wanted to say that, it took Ryan 3 years.
And even, exactly. And even if, so it's actually harder for us because we have nothing, right? So when you're talking to a seller, they see you, they're like, do you got any money? And I'm like, yeah, like you just lie kind of, right? And yes. I mean, it's actually harder for the younger people that have nothing because you're not seen as seasoned, right? And nobody thinks you have any capital to get the deal done. Because for a guy that's in his 70s to give you his life work and you buy it as a 20-year-old, granted, he may see a little bit of himself in you and all that, whatever you want to talk about. I mean, I definitely can, resolve in that situation or not, that's not the right word. But anyways, it's easier for somebody that has a little bit more money and is a little bit older, honestly, than someone like you and I, where we really had no money and we had to partner with people with money. Because if I do that now for my, if I'm selling something, do I want to sell to a first-time buyer? Not really, but that's, right. It is what it is. But.
Right. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. So in other words, just to reiterate what you said, because I thought it was brilliant. Just because you're not in your 20s with no kids, no wife or husband and no mortgage and no option doesn't mean that it comes without challenge or major sacrifice. Because if you're 40s, 50s, 60s, you probably have a decent nest egg. And you probably are better connected than you think. And people are just going to take you more seriously. I remember when Ian and I first started out, no one took us seriously. And I mean, it was one of my best friends right now apologizes to me every now and again because I call him out every now and again for not taking us seriously, which is really funny. It's a broker friend of mine. And that's just the nature of the beast. Whereas a lot of folks that I've met over the years that are in their 40s and 50s, and even if they've got no experience, people take them more seriously. So I couldn't have said that better myself. In other words, if we're going to say this is a game of poker, everybody gets a hand with pros and cons. And you can't look at someone younger or even someone older and be like, well, they had this, so here's an excuse for me to not chase my dream, because that's all it is. It's an excuse. So I want to take a second to talk about your way in, because it was very similar to mine. While you didn't actually go and live in a mobile home park, what you did was very similar. So Ian and I partnered up with Affordable Communities Group. We brought them a deal. They gave us equity in the form of, you brought the deal, so you get a finder's fee. And you're going to operate it, so you're going to get a salary, and you're going to literally do everything for us in terms of operations. And you kind of pretty much so did that with Buckeye, which has allowed you to literally learn the business in kind of like an apprenticeship, as well as be able to put food on the table. So for younger folks listening in, and even older folks, because one of my mentees who's a little bit older is actually going to do that with someone who's been in the business for like 20 years. Talk to us a little bit more about how someone can find a good, trustworthy partner like Affordable Communities Group, like Buckeye. How did you find them? How would you recommend thinking through that? And just in general, can you, without going into a tremendous amount of detail, just kind of in a generalistic sense, talk about that?
Yeah. So first of all, you have to be looking to buy deals yourself. Mine was organic. And it's not a perfect example, but it's my example, and it can work for other folks. So when I first started in the business, I put 2 parks under contract, and I actually contacted just through like an investors club. There's plenty of networks out there. Facebook, a lot more than there was 5 years ago. There's a lot more people interested in the space with a lot more money than there was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So I actually contacted one of the guys, just like was, hey, I'm looking at parks, I'm blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah. And then just throughout the years, just stayed in contact with him. And then when I moved to Cleveland, I met his partner, and him and I just kind of became friends. And they had reached a mass where they needed some help. And mine was more organic than others. But what I can say to that is, if you're looking for deals and you stay in contact with small to mid-size operators, those guys are always looking for more deals, and they're willing to do what, maybe they'll offer you a small salary to help them run operations. Because I can tell you from running operations on multiple parks, it's not necessarily a super intense position. It's more like there's a ton of paperwork and a lot of moving parts. So you need somebody just to offload some stuff, because when you're doing everything yourself, like a lot of us do, like I don't have an Ian. I mean, I do to some degree, but like I do a lot of stuff myself, and it's good to offload some stuff from time to time, right? Like Buckeye did. They offloaded some stuff to me. I do some of the different things with operations. And I would say go find that. There's guys like me and Ryan that will maybe partner on a deal, or some other people like us that are looking like, hey, we want to grow. So, I mean, if you're willing to kind of take the brunt of the operations, I mean, we, maybe have some money or some capital connections, and yeah, let's partner on a deal. So mine was organic, and it was organic by nature, by looking for partners out of necessity on deals that I was looking at purchasing. And it just happened over the span. And coming back to the preparation, I was more prepared than probably a lot of people would buying their first investment. I knew everything about parks that I could without actually owning them. So that allowed me to obviously speed up that curve from going from 0 to a couple hundred units in 2 short years, basically.
So in short, you brought them value.
Correct. Value.
Real value. Not like, hey, I'll come to work for you. You're like, guys, here's some serious value I'm bringing to the table.
Yeah, and whether we partnered on a deal or not, it didn't matter. I was still throwing them deals, and they knew who I was and what I could add. And yeah, I mean, I still work with them today. And I've bought my deals outside of that and with them as well. So I mean, it's you have to add value to people, and I hate the add value kind of saying, but the value add piece, but you do have to add value to people. Otherwise, hey, it's just nothing more than a stranger passing you by in conversation. So.
And in my opinion too, when you're starting out, you have to add way more value than you're getting back. And you have to be okay with that. I made an episode about that years ago, about how I had a moment where I was incredibly frustrated when I was looking at the accounting and going, I'm making someone else this much money, and I'm making how much? And then you go, oh yeah, I'm working full time chasing my dream. I had no money. I had no experience. I had no way to get a recourse loan because I'm broke. Like, it's just everybody, you can't just go into something as a black belt. You have to, everybody's a white belt at some point. You have to earn your belts, to use a karate analogy, but you've got to be okay making major sacrifices to get there. Ryan, where I want to end off is I want to reiterate and go into a little bit more detail about the timing. So in other words, you heard about mobile home parks, flash forward 3 years later after boot camp, doing a bunch of networking and research. Now you're full time. Can you spend, just to end off today, so folks who are looking at folks like myself and you who are like, okay, I love it. I dig it. I drank the Kool-Aid. I want to make a major sacrifice. I want to spend years prepping for this. Can you help give them proper expectations based off of going into a little bit more detail about how long it took you at each stage and where you're at today?
Can you re-ask that question? I apologize.
Yeah, let me put it to you this way. July of 2015, Ian and I decided we were going to start our Archimedes group. So we did the Frank and Dave book because we couldn't afford the boot camp, and we educated ourselves. Flash forward a little over a year, we bought our first one. 18 months after that moment, we bought our second. And then at almost a 2-year mark, we bought our third and went full time. Yeah. Then we lived at La Costa Mobile Home Park for about 14 months. Then I actually moved to Brittany Estates Mobile Home Park for another few months. So call it 18 months of air quotes living off and on in a double or single wide. And then flash forward a few more years of making $35,000 a year. I just finally in 2020 raised my own what I eat of what I make from $35,000 to $48,000. So I'm going on my 6th year anniversary, and I'm only cash flowing about $48,000 a year, but I work from home doing what I love. Ryan, tell me the kind of timeline and what you experienced through your journey up to this point today.
Yeah. So flashback 2015. So 5 years ago, going on my 6th year. It would be 6 years in fall. I went to Frank and Dave's boot camp, and I joined a couple others along the way too. So went to that boot camp, was 24, 25 years old. Then basically went home, kind of digested everything, basically drove around to all the mobile home parks in Cincinnati where I lived, built my own database of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Literally didn't hire a VA because I didn't have any money or I didn't want to spend any money. So I just basically built my own database, started calling, sending out mailers, looked at a couple deals, looked at this, that, kind of learned the ins and outs of the business a little bit more from a buying and acquisition perspective. Like a year into it, basically, I think I put my first deal under contract, and it was like 3 hours away, and it was like a smaller deal. It was like 20 or 30 units. I can't even remember. Didn't end up going through with that. It was just it was too far away based on that I was still working full time, and I was chasing smaller deals versus larger deals, which is probably what I would say is chase larger deals because they always hold a little bit more value than smaller. But yeah, so it took me 3 years with like 3 or 4 parks under contract before I actually purchased one. And I purchased my first one in December of 2018, which was 2.5 years ago from this point. And we had it under contract for 6 months before we closed. And then fast forward basically 2 years and 8 parks later, I purchased 8 parks in basically 2 years, from 2018 to 2021, which is where we are present day. I've purchased 8 parks. I've sold 2. I've operated with my Buckeye job. I've operated another, probably 5 to 10 parks there, and probably close to 1,000 units I've been involved with. That's my kind of story in a nutshell, and kind of the timeline and the expectations. And along that time, while I was putting deals under contract, it seemed that if I hadn't left a corporate job, maybe I wouldn't have been forced, or I was always scared to buy the deal, right? Because I always had analysis paralysis, whatever you want to call it. And I never actually followed through with the contract and moving forward. And for one reason or the other, on what I told myself. Still to this day, like right now, sitting here today, I would have never thought that I'm probably going to cross the 500 lot threshold, which is not really a magical number because if you sell stuff, it doesn't really matter. Who cares, right? But we have a bunch under contract. We have like 5 parks under contract right now. And we're set to close on next month and hopefully a couple more from the months after, which is, I would have never thought, being 25 and now 30, that I'd be doing this like to this day. I thought it would have taken me a lot longer than what I kind of expected initially.
I want to reiterate that. So in almost 6 years, I've by far and away exceeded all of my initial expectations, but I got to say it is definitely like a hockey stick. It's lots of plateau, and then boom, all of a sudden everything happens seemingly all at once, and it just goes so quickly. So yes, and anyone listening in, setting expectations for, hey, I want to do what Ryan and Ryan did, and Ian, it's going to be years before you make traction, and it's going to be possibly years after you start making traction, but within, call it 5 to 6 years, within, I don't know, the last third of that, it will be potentially exponential growth where you just go, this is unbelievable to me. If you had told me this is how it was going to go, I wouldn't have believed you. So in other words, call it the first 4 years are really a grind, and then the next 2 just explode. And you look back and you're like, my net worth is what? I make how much? I get to do what I love, but I sacrificed for like literally years to get to that point. Mm-hmm. So Ryan, always a pleasure. So glad we finally got you on. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm going to drop a way to get in touch with you in the show notes. Again, very few people in this space have made the sacrifices you and I've made. And I really want to thank you for your time. And also, again, for being one of the folks who make me uncomfortable at what you are willing to sacrifice. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on the show. And hopefully I hear from some of your listeners. Looking forward to it.
Rock on.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.